This is a terrific chance to talk with people who make music, who are really articulate about it, love it. So, on my left is Max Richter, the composer, and to his left is Daniel Hope, the violinist. Gentlemen, before us is Max Richter's album, Recomposed, involving Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Max, where did you get the idea to take this incredibly familiar work, take it apart, and put it back together in your own fashion?
Well, it's a thing I've been carrying the idea around for many years, and really the thing that started me wanting to do it was that kind of process which probably lots of us have with this piece, which is we fall in love with it when we first hear it, when we're kids. And then because we hear it, everywhere, all the time, we just kind of fall out of love. And for me, it was a kind of a way to reclaim it and to kind of, by having this kind of conversation with the original, thinking through it, and kind of, just kind of reclaiming the piece for me, in a way.
Daniel, when did you get involved with this? Was your work all done, Max, when Daniel showed up?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was contacted by Max, who had this idea. When I first heard the idea, I was, a little surprised, because it's a piece that you spend all your life playing as a violinist. And we had this great conversation, and Max said, I want to recompose the Four Seasons. And I cheekily said, well, what's wrong with the original? And Max, he gave that wonderfully enigmatic smile and said, nothing's wrong with it. It's perfect. But I'd like to reframe it. I'd like to rediscover it. And that I thought was really interesting, because as Max says, it's everywhere. Wherever you look and wherever you hear, every elevator, every, on being on hold, you heard it all the time. And this way, Max was able to put something very new to it.
So what did you do, Max? How did you start? Where did you start with this piece?
Well, I started really just kind of thinking about it and spending just time with the score. And the thing that struck me about the way it is on the page is, at first glance, there are pages which are, just sort of 16th notes. Just, it's very sort of, it almost looks quite contemporary, actually. You'd think, well, it's kind of, that could be, at first glance, some kind of post-minimal material or something. And I felt like there was a kind of common ground there in the kind of, the sort of modular aspect of the way that Vivaldi had constructed the original. And I basically just kind of followed my enthusiasms through it. Making music of any sort is about, finding things you love and sort of playing those. And in this case, I had this amazing sort of mine full of incredible material, and I just kind of dug my way through it quite intuitively.
The original piece tells a story in some sonnets that are maybe Vivaldi's about each of the Four Seasons. Yeah. Did you worry about keeping those stories intact in your version, or did you create new ones?
No, for me, it's really about the notes. It's about the notes on the page and the way those structures can be sort of reinvigorated and transformed. So I didn't think too much about the sort of programmatic element of it. For me, I was sort of following the material, really.
So how much is left of the Vivaldi piece in this recomposition?
Probably about somewhere between 10 and 20%, I'd say.
Really?
Yeah.
So you really did?
Yeah, not very much. Not very much.
So Daniel, as you said, every violinist in the world plays the Four Seasons. It's part of your currency as a musician. And then this Richter guy comes along and says, here's the Four Seasons, but not. It must have been a little bit of a challenge to learn it.
Yeah, it was, because, as I said, you get it really in your head and it's in your fingers. And Max throws you several curves throughout the piece. So he takes elements of it, but then he breaks them up, or he redesigns the patterns. So you find yourself, I found myself at the beginning going back to the original and had to keep, jolting myself into the new version.
It's almost a video game. New road. It looks familiar, and then it veers off suddenly. Have you memorized it?
I have memorized it, but I haven't actually really had the guts to play it without the score, because it's so, there are moments that are so close rhythmically that I just do worry that I would lapse into the original. The original I always would play from memory. So.
Yeah.
And have you played the original since you've played this one?
I have. The first time was terrible because I so much got back into Max's world that I had to get back into Vivaldi. But now actually it's really nice. I really enjoy it. And for me, the great thing is that I've really fallen back in love with the original.
Yeah.
As it's really wonderful because you learn to appreciate all the different aspects of it, and yet the new composition is something which is so full of energy and vision. It's wonderful to play it. So it's a great combination.
Did you have a moment's thought about what a violinist might go through as you were recomposing this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was aware of the fact that, for a violinist, this is much, much tougher than it is for me, because obviously, as Daniel was saying, these guys have it sort of hardwired inside them, and they need to have it there. And for me to sort of modify and sort of re-engineer this material, I think it's probably easier when it diverts wildly from the original. But there are sections which are really quite close, and there's a certain amount of kind of sleight of hand with the original material, and that you do need to have that inside you, I think.
I get the sense that as you were writing this, you didn't know what you were making.
I don't think you ever know what you're making. You sort of...
Well, you might, if you're writing a mass or you're writing a concerto or you're writing a piece for a specific purpose, but you didn't know what you'd wind up with, did you?
Well, it's a voyage of discovery. It's for me, I think of it a little bit like sort of thinking aloud about the Vivaldi or daydreaming about it. It's a series of questions. Here's this wonderful material. What happens if I do this? And then you get a sort of chemical reaction in that material, and then it takes off and it has a life of its own. And those moments, where it sort of catches fire and comes to life, that's very exciting for a composer, because then you suddenly have something going on,
When you got together with the Konzerthaus Kammerorchester Berlin and the conductor Andre de Ritter to make the recording with Max, what was the interaction then? Were there changes made? Was there discussion? Was there, why the hell did you do this to me here? Was there, maybe we should rethink this section here? What happened when you finally stirred the pot?
Well, I think what happens is what you always get when you have a new piece and you have the composer there. Max had composed it and prepared it, and then we got to the rehearsals and the performance and
the motion
recording.
you're making with your hands is as if they were around his throat. I'm sure
no,
that's
it wasn't
unconscious.
as bad as that. No. But there were changes, there were suggestions. Max was hearing it live for the first time as well.
Yeah.
He'd had it in his mind, he'd had it, on a computer. But when you actually have musicians there playing it, reacting to what's on the page, often one hears different things, or we had questions. So. It was a pretty civil process, but there were quite a few changes.
Yes.
What were some of the changes? Just little notes here and there, or did you actually recompose?
No. They're tiny little, the kinds of things you would always do, really. Even, it's about, a recording is about finding it in the room with those human beings on that day, on those days. And it's, whichever way you can sort of find to kind of deliver the material in the most natural and, in a way, obvious way, that kind of feels right. And that's about, articulation and shapes and little dynamic things, which you can sort of put in the score, but also you just need the people. Yeah.
And I'm sure they appreciated the fact that they had the composer there to ask about that too.
Yeah, possibly.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the great benefit of when you have a new piece and you have the composer there. We can't ask Beethoven and Mozart, what they thought, but if you have a living composer there, it makes it very exciting because you're able to, you're part of the creation, the creative process. One
of the very new things that's in this recomposed version of Vivaldi's Four Seasons is the very first movement, which you, Max, titled Spring Zero. It's a little prologue, I would say.
Exactly.
And where did that come from? Was that the last thing you did or the first thing you did?
It came fairly late on in the process. It was always intended to be there, but I had to make some instrumental recordings in order to be able to make that piece, because it uses some orchestral recordings and then manipulates them in the computer. You're right, it's a prologue. It's a sort of curtain raiser overture scene setting moment, which sort of, it's like a sort of palate cleanser, I think, before we start, yeah.
We won't talk to the other musicians, the LPR ensemble, who will be out here in a moment. What were their reactions? The musicians who made the recording. Did you also have to deal with the rest of the band a little bit?
Well, I think what was interesting about it was there was initial shock, of course, and sort of because there's a sort of huge readjustment actually for players, who've been playing this material their whole lives, and it was sort of quite interesting actually to hear the sound of the orchestra be, across a bar line from the original Vivaldi to my material, completely different. It's like a different orchestra. And then during the rehearsal process, those two sounds fused together as they started to understand the roadmap a little bit. And then they brought, actually, in the end, a wonderful enthusiasm, and they were very committed, and it was a great sessions, actually.
Daniel, every piece that's written is a reaction to another piece or influenced by. Music is a conversation across time, across centuries, too. You are in conversation with Vivaldi a lot when you play the Four Seasons. You're in conversation with Max Richter when you play this, but is Vivaldi there, too? Who's talking here? Is it both of them? Is it the three of you?
That's a good and very difficult question to answer. I mean, I think that sometimes I have the feeling it's Vivaldi seen through Max's eyes and ears. So I feel there is a connection to Vivaldi, but it's very much filtered. Sometimes Max has actually left the original at very small moments. It suddenly appears, and then you're right back there in the middle of Baroque Venice. And then there are moments in the piece where you're taken to a completely different place, which has very little to do with Vivaldi and is very much about Max's world. So I think, in a sense, you're a kind of a time traveler through this piece. That's what makes it, for me, so exciting, is that you're constantly changing your point of view.
It's wonderful to have the varnish taken off an old work and have it revived in a way like this. Do we have any questions? We're going to get a performance in a couple of minutes. If we have any questions, raise a hand. We'll run a microphone over to you. Gentleman in the middle of the room here.
Why aren't we using the word remix?
Why am I not using the word remix? We could have called it a remix. It is a remix, but on paper. I've remixed the actual notes rather than the audio. So it's kind of like an analog remix in a way. It's maybe like a remix that, Vivaldi could have done, actually. Just taken the dots on the page. And yeah, we could have called it that. It's part of this series that Deutsche Grammophon already had called Recomposed. So that was kind of a given. And it kind of describes the process quite well for me.
It's also something that composers have been doing for centuries, and Vivaldi was somebody that used to remix his own music all the time. I mean, he would take pieces that he had composed, he put them into different keys, he'd steal bits of it and make other pieces out of it. He would, increase the virtuosity in order for effect. He was somebody that was very much about performance, and pushing things to the limit. So,
but do you compose with a pencil and a paper, or did you compose at a keyboard and record it, or was it done on a computer?
I compose on a piece of paper mostly, but then obviously in terms of providing a kind of like a demo almost, or a sort of mock-up of this, I made a version in the computer for various people to hear and stuff.
I'm glad you say that. We are at the Apple Store after all. It'd be a shame if it was just all pencil and paper.
Exactly.
That would hardly be in the spirit
That's right. No,
the world of technology in which we are surrounded at this time.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks.